Welcome to the Bringing Intimacy Back show, where intimacy is real. If you desire to intimately connect with yourself, significant other, children, family, friends, community, and higher power, then this is the show for you. We explore intimate topics, inspiring life stories, spirituality, and insightful tips on strengthening relationships. The show is hosted by Dr. April and her co-host, Coach K. Let's get this episode of the Bringing Intimacy Back show started. We share with you today the secret power to intimacy to create the life you love or love the life you create. Now here's your host, Dr. April, and her co-host, Coach K.
Welcome to the Bring It Intimacy Back show, where intimacy is real. How are you doing, Coach K?
I'm doing amazing. And how about yourself?
I'm doing okay. It's been one of those tough weeks. And I know you've been there yourself recently, where we actually had a loss in our family this week. So it's been a very emotional aspect.
That is a very emotional time, and I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah. And so I'm kind of glad we're having this discussion today about emotions, because I see emotions, especially when it comes to relationship, as really the most juiciest part.
Yes, it's. I love the way you say it. It's the meat, the juice. Yes.
Yes. And so today we're really talking about how do you bridge that emotional gap?
That's an important thing, and we don't even think about it, that there are gaps in emotions, not just between people, but within yourself too.
Right. Yes, definitely. Yes. And I'm glad that you mentioned that. And that is something we're definitely going to talk about, that emotional gap within us, and then how it shows up as we are navigating through relationships. So one thing about bringing intimacy back, every time we always talk about a charity of the month. And the charity that we decided to do for January is also kind of a very, when it's happening to you, it can be very, very emotional. And that's stalking.
Yes.
You know, as people, women, we have to be safe. And when you're stalked, you're like, oh my gosh, someone's after me, whether it's someone you don't know, someone you know. Yeah, it's a very emotional thing.
It is. It plays on you severely because, especially when you don't really know, but you have an inkling. So everyone else around you is like, oh, you're crazy. But it's like, it weighs on you heavily.
Yeah. And so for stalking, we do have a charity that helps in the prevention, awareness, and also resources. So if you've been in that process, so go to www.stalkingawareness.org/donate if you would like to donate.
Great organization.
Yes, it's a great organization for people out there. Definitely. So as we were talking about, I'm so excited about today's topic, bridging that emotional gap.
Absolutely. This is going to be a great conversation, making connections and bridging those gaps.
Yes. And so when we come back, we're going to talk with an expert who really, that's what one of his mission is, really is the expert of making people feel good. So we're going to see how that happens, how the magic works. But we'll be back in a moment. And when we come back, we're going to bring Vincent Infante back as our guest to understand this whole thing about bridging the gap. We'll be back in a moment.
A must-have for parents-to-be, first-time parents, empty nesters, and parents all around. There are infinite ways to parent a child, but the trick is trying to figure out the best way that fits you and your child. Create strong connections during pregnancy, to not pulling your hair out during the terrible twos, navigating puberty, and having adult conversations with your adult children. The intimacy of parenthood covers it all. and it is now on Amazon, available in Kindle, Audible, and paperback.
Welcome back to the Bringing Intimacy Show, where intimacy is real. Welcome, Vin.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yes. I want to make sure I pronounce your last name correctly. It's Infante.
That is correct.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on this show today. And I understand you're an expert at making people feel good.
Oh, yeah. I I like to think so. I like to think that through our work together, people start stepping into their higher and better versions of themselves, which ultimately leads to a more fulfilling and, as we just mentioned, feeling better in their life.
Right, definitely. And I'm so excited about this topic of emotions because for me, as I was telling Coach K, I do feel like emotions are really kind of the juice of relationships. You know, it's one of those juicy intimacies that that is so important.
100%. You know, I was having a call before with a friend who I haven't really talked to in almost a year, actually. And one of the things that we were talking about is how you wind up normalizing things. And when you start normalizing things, the emotional excitement around it starts to diminish. We do that with everything. Relationships don't just have to be about you and your loved one. It could be about you and maybe you got your brand new car. And after a year, it's not a new car and you're not excited to get in it and drive it anymore. You got a tattoo and it's 10 years later and you don't care about it. So as much as I love talking about these aspects of intimacy and connection in relationships, because I feel that's really where it's super important, it's also understanding we have relationships to everything in our life, and we could either be really enthusiastic and engaged or disengaged and passively experiencing it.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned this, how sometimes we normalize and we say, oh yeah, this has happened. So just normalize it versus feeling that emotion.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because I was just sharing with her that I recently had a death in the family. And so it's also, sometimes people just like normalize, hey, people die all the time, but how you have to, really feel it in that aspect. Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry to hear about that.
Yeah.
And I think it's also interesting even to talk about death, right? Because in some cultures, and even way before our modern culture, death was celebrated, even though it would be a sad thing. It would be a cause for a celebration because you're going on to that next life. And now look at how we've changed the relationship to death. It's mourning. It's solemn. It's everybody be quiet. Everybody wear black. Like if you're talking in the area, whisper. It's interesting how we see relationships always changing throughout time and history, culture, interpersonally, business, everything in relationships can change. It's so interesting.
Yes. Yeah. And like you said, even culture really impacts that whole emotional piece.
Yeah.
And gender does too, many times. Yeah.
Of course. Especially, for guys, like we're often not comfortable sharing emotions. We're also not really told to share emotions. There's the feeling of being judged for sharing your emotions. I mean, there's so much that comes with being a guy and having any type of emotional awareness. And that's a big part of my mission too, is helping men understand how to share emotions without feeling like they're less than a man.
Right. And your background is as a firefighter.
Yes. Well, that's one piece of it for sure. It's part of my past life.
Yes. And most people think, firefighters, maybe, that strong man, and sharing emotions.
It's definitely interesting because you experience a lot of things as a firefighter. And sometimes I've come to notice is that a lot of the guys don't really want to share what's going on. There's different ways of dealing with emotions. Everybody has their own form of expression or lack thereof. I've come to see that a lot of people that tend to deal with a lot of things that stack up in their lives can often actually lead more towards comedy. I've seen a lot more people use comedy to overcome trauma and deeper issues than, people actually diving into depression or sadness, which is interesting.
So that,
yeah. And just thinking about the most recent thing with the comics and with all the comics that are coming out and speaking out their truths and kind of going back and forth with each other. One of the things that was said is one of those comedians when he talks, it's literally a real thing that's happening in the world today. And we're able to find some sort of comedy in it, even though it's tragic and it's happening and it's bad. So that's a very good point.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, at least from what I've come to learn, is that comedy is one of the most powerful forms of expression. It's something that I actually use it a lot when I'm coaching and working with clients. Like if somebody comes to me, like for instance, somebody came to me one time and they were talking to me about how they were experiencing a loss and it was really hitting them hard. And in about 15 minutes into our session, I had them laughing. And I love that because I see it as, if you could get somebody, and that's kind of what comedy is. If you could get somebody to a state of joy, you can help them turn around the entire situation. Because when we're feeling stuck and we're feeling disconnected, whether it's from your lover, yourself, anyone, it's this deeper sorrow. It's a fear, it's a sadness, it's an anger, whatever that negative emotion is. And you can't have a different experience without having a different emotion, right? Like it's impossible to have the feeling of gratitude and the feeling of fear at the same time. They can't exist in the same plane. So I ultimately love to teach people how to start shifting their emotional states, have that pattern recognition, do these emotional interventions so that they could get out of these things that keep them stuck and then start allowing them to move forward towards what they're actually looking to obtain.
Wonderful said. Yeah. And I was just thinking, because I do a lot of improv with humor, it's also many times it uses your whole body. You know, and how that makes you in the present moment.
Right. That's a great point. I think when we're looking at how does it make your body feel, and one thing I love to remind people of is that emotions are just energy in motion. One of the best ways, and there's even been research showing that people have been able to work out trauma and PTSD through actually working out. And so as you move your body, you're expending emotion. And, you know, there's so many different things, right? There's a whole book on it. It's called The Body Keeps the Score, where they talk about how your emotion, your trauma gets stored in your body. So we have to look at how is it that people are starting to break through these emotional stuckness within them? How are they freeing their body so that they could free up new experiences and start changing things in their own lives?
Yeah. So in your work, when people are stuck, you know, whether it's a couple or a friendship or a family member, they're stuck. And the topic of this, you know, thing is, how do you bridge the gap? When you're stuck, and let's start even just for one person. I've met people who sometimes don't know how they feel.
Right.
You know, before you can communicate it and create a bridge. Yeah. What do you do when someone says, I just don't know how I feel? They cannot articulate.
So it's very interesting. So let's do this whole thing in like a step-by-step process, so the listeners can get the most out of this, right?
Yes.
So let's start there. If you don't even know what you're feeling, how can I help you? The answer is, I can't help you in the way I'd like to at that moment, but I could support you in a different way. And so when somebody isn't sure how they feel, what it really is a deeper disconnection internally. So if they're having this disconnection, how do we create connection is the biggest question. Now think of, I don't know if you ladies have children.
Yes.
Okay, so do I. So I'm in the stage though. My child's young. She's going to be 2 in like a month. So we're in the stage of teaching her like angry and sad, right? And like we are over accentuating emotions to her. Now think about when people have trauma or they have some sort of dissociation or disconnect, to be able to bring them back almost to a childlike state so that they can learn is one of the best things you could do. And people might feel silly. You might be sitting there talking to a 40-year-old and being like, do you feel angry? Like, are you getting like in the moment? And they're going to be like, why are you talking to me like I'm 2? And it's like, because that's your emotional capacity right now. You are basically a 2-year-old. You might be 40, but you're actually 2 emotionally. And so one of the things that I try to teach people, and I used to work with children. I used to do couples and marriage counseling and all that stuff. And I always tell people is you have to meet them where they're at. So you might be pissed because your husband is a jerk and he should know better because he's 45 years old. But if you actually take a step back and you don't feel offended that your husband isn't understanding you or knowing how to connect to you, my question would be, is he actually 45 mentally, emotionally? Like, where did his development stunt and how old is he relatively to his actual age, which should also shift your expectations as the partner in the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Yes. And how can I pay? Sometimes, and what really happens, you know, to further that conversation is sometimes when people use other avenues growing up, whether it's drugs, gambling, addiction, they get stunted.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you're right. You have to realize, well, maybe he's just that, or she is just a teenager.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And you have this expectation, but the person's here, you know, and it's that discrepancy.
It's never, or I shouldn't say it's never, but most of the time it is not fun and has never been fun for me to work with children. Reason being is that parents, then like you have to communicate with the parents, you have to work with the child. They have to be on the same points. They have to really be a team in this. And a lot of the times they're not. But the thing that's actually more frustrating isn't even working with young children. It's working with older children. So I've had parents enroll their children to work with me. And when we're thinking children, you might be thinking young, but I'm going up to like age 19, 20, 22 now. And the issue is that the parent is pissed. Why is he acting? Why is she acting like this? And it's like, well, no. I don't want an excuse. She's 21. She's 22. She needs to get her crap together. Why is she acting this way? And it's like, well, because she's like 7, man. Right. She's actually 7. and they can't understand this. And it's parts of they don't want to. And the other is just that expectation, right? It's like, she should know better. She's 21. And it's like, but she's not. She's actually 7. And every time you come down on her, it's like coming down on a 7-year-old. So what is she doing? She's throwing a tantrum. She's yelling at you. She's fighting. You're literally having an argument with a 7-year-old who's 21. And so these capabilities, I think, to shine lights into people's lives is one of also the better ways to start bridging gaps and start helping them. Because if you could get people involved in the support in the circle, all of a sudden you could start creating a bigger level of understanding, which can then also encourage the growth of the person at an accelerated rate. Right. So imagine you have a family, like I'm a father. I'm trying to be a better dad, but I have my own emotional issues from childhood.
Right.
Now, instead of my wife yelling at me every 5 minutes or my mom telling me I'm being a bad dad or whatever, we get everybody on board. And it's like, listen, Vin has had this issue with his childhood. He's really trying to learn to express himself. If you guys can help him along in X, Y, and Z, whenever he's doing X, Y, and Z, or point this out, we can help Vin accelerate his growth and start building more of that internal system so he could have that awareness to get to that next level. Mm-hmm. Because people don't want the process of change. They just want the change, right? It's
right.
I want you to be functioning at a 30-year-old capacity, even though you're 7 right now. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, you got to get 7 to 12 to 22 to 29 to 30. So that's a big piece.
Yeah. How do you work with those individuals who, let's say I'm at a 7, but you have so much pride, you know what I'm saying? And you like, you know, I don't want to be this way. I know I need to change. You know, what's the carrot to motivate them to say, hey, I need to put in the work. I need to humble myself, that my emotional intelligence is not as high that it needs to be.
So contrary to popular belief, people do not change because of the fact that something feels so good. Right. They change because something feels so bad that they can no longer ignore it.
Yeah.
So when you're experiencing a level of pain, what I would do is, and mind you, there's a caveat here, right? Because I don't motivate people. I don't believe that's my job. I like to work with the motivated because that's when you're going to actually get results. Mm-hmm. And I've come to understand, and I'm sure you ladies, as in your expertise, also know, is that we facilitate a space for change to occur. We don't create the change. Mm-hmm. And so what I would do is if somebody's there seeking help, but they're stuck in that regard, I would just amplify their pain. I would say, okay, You're telling me that you want to change, but you're not really putting in the work. What's the thing you don't want to happen? It's like, well, my wife is going to leave with my kid. It's like, okay, so your wife's going to leave with your kid if you don't work on this. And then we might say, well, that's not enough. It's like, okay, well, let's keep making it more painful. She's not only going to leave, she's going to take the house. You're never going to see your kid. You're going to lose half your income. You're going to have a lot more problems than just having a wife that leaves you. So let's really amplify that so you can experience the whole magnitude. And if you really want to get crazy with it, have them do this visualization of it. So what I'll do sometimes is I'll take people into a deep visualization of their future. And it'll say like, all right, I want you to see all of this pain in your next 5 years. Now I want you to intensify it, amplify it, feel it, double it, triple it. And they start getting to this point where their body is almost like, holy crap, I need to do something now.
Right.
So it really, I would say the first part is it really depends on someone being motivated to do the work. And then the second one is helping them enhance and understand their pain so that they can recognize that the pain of staying the same will be worse than the pain of change.
Right, exactly. And I say it a little different way, but the same thing. Yeah, people change when the pain is greater than the fear of change.
Yes. 100%.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So let's move to step number 2 or 3, where the person knows their emotions, but there's still this gap.
Okay. So same thing. We want people to be in a team, right? We want everybody. And now if they're coming in solo and there's no team, that honestly makes it a lot easier. But now they're at this point where they're able to start recognizing emotions. The only emotion that you cannot change is one that you have not challenged. So what I mean by that is people get stuck because they've created patterns. How are these patterns formed? They start very young. We know that people are the most neuroplastic between 0 to 12 years old. It's when they are forming all of their deepest beliefs about life, about language, emotions, patterns, recognitions, all of this stuff. And so we have to actually unwork however many years old you are of patterns so that we could start helping you shift. So I would start questioning, well, what's the meaning? Oh, this guy cut me off in the car. All right. Why are you pissed off? Well, if he cuts me off, he's a jerk. Also, people don't really realize this, but if you're angry over something, it actually means you feel helpless. So I would point that out. I'd be like, so there's a level of helplessness to this, which is what causes the anger, and your attempt to feel powerful is why anger comes up. Number 2 is, why is it that this person cut you off because they're a jerk? What if they cut you off because they just found out that the mom is in the hospital and she's not going to live? Or their kid just got hit by a car and they're rushing. Now, all of a sudden, that person's emotional intensity starts to go down and they feel like a jerk. And they're like, well, I guess I wouldn't really be mad because I do the same. It's like, okay, great. That right there, that's you challenging that cutoff equals anger.
Right.
So what would be a better emotion that we could utilize in times like this? How do we start implementing that? And how can we get more curious instead of certain? Because certainty is what actually creates these emotional patterns. We're certain if he cuts us off, he's a jerk. But what if we weren't certain of that? What if we were curious? Or what if we were just even taking a more relaxed approach of like, you know what? I left at this time of day. If I didn't leave at this time, I wouldn't have gotten cut off because I wouldn't even be here right now. What if you take the ownership over this situation? So there's actually a lot of different tools. What I would say is it really depends on the person, because obviously not every tool is going to work for everyone. And you got to try things over and over and see which really is the best fit.
Right. But I love that tool of, instead of focusing on certainty, focus on curiosity.
Yes.
Yeah. I just think even overall in the whole scheme of the whole world and where we're at, if we were more curious.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, our gaps will be,
Curiosity is the key. It's the key to everything. You want to be a better father? Get curious how you could do that. You want to be a better lover in your relationship? Get curious about your other person's needs and how you could show up more powerfully. You want to be a better employee? Get curious about what it takes to really get recognized in your office. You want to be a better business owner, an entrepreneur? Get curious about how you could provide more value to your customer. And again, this all stems back. Each thing I've talked about is a relationship. Everything is relationships, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. And so curiosity is the key to leading you into healthier, better, and more fulfilling relationships. Because when you're curious about how you could show up to be more powerful in that space, you're ultimately going to show up with the best intentions. And in those best intentions, you're ultimately going to do more, be more, and just provide more. And who doesn't want to be around someone like that?
Wow, you have just such depth of knowledge and resources. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, and so I'm also curious. Tell us a little bit more about how, if people want to connect with you, what kind of products and services that you have. Yes.
Love to. Okay. See, and I love it. You're already curious. You said, I'm curious. That's it. We're building our relationship,
Yes,
Dr.
of course.
So if people are curious about me, they can find my website is basically, it's my name. It's www.vincentinfante.life. There we go. Boom, popped up. Love it. You're quick on that. So they could go there. There are a few things that I have going on. I have some free stuff. I have a free newsletter. I have a free, what's that thing? It's called the Mission Board. So it's a free product. It's basically to help you be more intentional in creating your future. And then if anybody's curious about going deeper with me, you could always book a free call and you could just see what it looks like to have a conversation. And then, of course, check out my socials. I would love for people to follow me because I post content. Sometimes it's funny. Yeah, sometimes it's funny, but mostly it's informative. So check out my stuff. It's Vin Infante on my socials, pretty much anywhere that you love being on socials.
Wow. Thank you so much for being a guest on the show. We really do appreciate it. Yeah, you've brought definitely some depth to this and I hope for people to continue to have these conversations and to connect with you. Yes.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. It was a lot of fun and you asked a lot of great questions.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll take a break and we'll be back in a moment.
Sex should not be the elephant in the room. The fourth ebook of the Improving Intimacy book series, From Bringing Intimacy Back, It's All About Sex, helps you navigate every which way you can tend to your sex life. Pulling out all the stops, dive into the sensual read about sex toys, silky linens, and date nights. Improving Intimacy, It's All About Sex is available on Amazon, Kindle, Audible, and paperback. Search Dr. April Brown on Amazon to view all her books on improving intimacy for yourself, spouse, and more.
Welcome back to the Bringing Intimacy show, where intimacy is real. Wow, that was a very good conversation.
It really was very insightful and relatable.
Right. Yeah. And I just loved about the concept of curiosity and just being curious. And I think if we're more curious about people's intent, then we won't have these outrageous emotions of anger. We use a little bit of empathy.
Yeah, the first thing I thought about when he said the curiosity part is the old saying, curiosity killed the cat. That had been ingrained in us for so long that you almost didn't want to be. So yeah, we've gotten away from it, but we absolutely need to get back to curiosity. And that's how come young children nowadays seem sometimes to be more emotionally intelligent than adults in situations.
Right, because we don't know anything for certain. I mean,
that's right.
Yeah, definitely. So what's coming up next?
We have some great shows coming up. So on January 25th, we have Overcoming the Impact of Pornography in Marriage with Timothy Regal. On February the 1st, we have Men, Loneliness, and Social Isolation with Jason Lane. On February the 8th, we have 10 best date night ideas for an unforgettable evening. That'll be the two of us.
Yes.
And then on the 15th, let's spice up your love life. Some sexercises for a fun time. That's going to be interesting.
Yes. So excited to hear about these things. Yes, definitely. So if you're out there listening and you have a topic that you want us to talk about, please just hit us up or send us an email at bringingintimacyback.com. But you can definitely follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And yes, We will see you guys next week. This has been the Bringing Intimacy Back show, where intimacy is real. See you all next week. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Bringing Intimacy Back, where intimacy is real. You can also find us at bringingintimacyback.com, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Dr. April Brown's 7th book series, Improving Intimacy, is now on Amazon. We'll see you next Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Don't forget to follow, share, and subscribe.